Again, YouTube, Stick Guy 187 back again for another knife review. I've got a comparison one for part of the personal defense series. Two United Cutlery products again. Like I said, if I've got them and they're similar, I'll probably compare them. I've got the United Cutlery Stinger Dagger. This one they call a boot knife, but that's a fairly big sheath for a boot knife. And this is the M48 Tactical Push Dagger, though it is not actually a T-handle design, so under Canadian law this is not considered a push dagger. It's also considered a boot knife or a neck knife, though, well, we'll get to it in a second. So first we'll start with the Stinger. The sheath is a standard nylon ballistic sheath. They've got a plastic insert to hold the knife in place, and your safety retention is a one-button strap. The handle is actually kind of a rubbery Santoprene, very similar to what they have on the Combat Commander. Gives you a good grip overall. It's very small handle for the knife itself. I believe the total blade length is 5 1/4 and the total knife length is 8 3/8. So I mean the handle itself is slightly over 3 inches. In a big hand, it feels like a toy. This is my girlfriend's knife. Her hands, they fit it properly, and she says it's really comfortable in her grip. So this would be a good personal defense item choice for, say, ladies or men with a smaller grip. One of the issues I have with it, besides the fact that the boot knife, I try to put this into my boot, it's going to stick out like crazy. The sheath, when it sits on your belt, if you want it to, it's got one of those standard little clips on the back that doesn't really have strongest spring and doesn't really hold itself on your belt. So it's one thing to be aware of. You might want to bend that to modify it, or carry it somewhere else. The biggest issue I have with this knife, you can see the design of the knife. It is all point. There's a slight recurve here and then a slight swell, and then it comes down to a really wicked point. Very, very good for penetration. But the blade is dull, completely dull, and you cannot sharpen it because there's not really enough steel to get a good angle. I've tried sharpening it with a whetstone. It doesn't really work very well. But one of the things that you know about daggers is they're penetration weapons. You're not really going to be slicing with a dagger this thin. This is almost a stiletto. But if you do need to slice or tear with it, United Cutlery put on these little serrations. They're actually decent serrations. They're not. The knife itself is, dull. The serrations will tear a bit. If I can get the paper to tear. So, I mean, the serrations are really, if you get in close and you tear it across the skin, they'll bleed. But if you're in that close and you tear it, you might as well pokey, pokey, pokey. Again, self-defense situations only. My girlfriend loves this knife. I will admit I almost sent it back because of the dullness, but she loves it because she knows it is just mostly for stabbing. She also likes the fact that unlike the Combat Commander Tactical Toothpick or Combat Toothpick, the Quillians are rubber coated, so they're less likely to break, and they're also really good for the overall grip. So that's this one. So what am I comparing it to? Well, part of the M48 series is the push dagger. You've probably seen the other actual push dagger where it's got the T-handle. This one itself is just a really little knife, neck knife, boot knife. One of the unique things about this, and I'll come in a little closer to show you, it's a chisel style knife blade. So what does that mean? Well, it means that only one side is actually sharpened. In this case, it's got a scandy, so one angle and then a second angle to a chisel. It doesn't make it that sharp. Back to my cutting paper. So I'm going to uncut it. It's tearing the paper. But what it really does is it provides a really good spine for penetration. And as you can see, all I did was lock my fingers around it, and even though it's not a push knife, it'll give you a decent handle to thrust with. Really, really small knife overall. I think it's like 5.5 inches with a 2.5-inch blade. Again, I bought this for my girlfriend. I bought one for myself too. I figured, hey, a neck knife, awesome, let's give it a shot. But I don't like the chisel style. It's a very thick blade. I think it's like 1/4 inch thick. I mean, it's full tang, so it's very rigid and sturdy construction, but this isn't a knife that I would normally carry. One of the nice things is there's multiple angles on the blade. So you end up with a modified Tonto point going into a very wicked overall point. That's great for penetration, and in a self-defense situation, you can pull the neck knife and this edge does tip slashing very, very well. Slash, get away, that kind of stuff. It actually does have a decent finger guard, not really a pommel or quillions or anything right there, but it gives you nice blade control overall. Like I said, you can carry it in the push dagger style. They gave you a decent swell here. I think that was part of the overall design, and the reason for calling it a push dagger was you could grip the swell and use it. A couple of limitations. I mean, besides the fact that it's not sharp on the actual blades itself, despite that tip slashing point, the scales are loose. I had to already take them off, Loctite the screws, and put a little bit of Loctite underneath the scales to actually hold them in place. The sheath, forgot where I put it there for a second, holds the knife securely. It's not Kydex, it's a form injection plastic. But what they gave you is they gave you the boot or belt clip and some lanyard holes, so you could put it as a neck knife if you wanted to. On the belt, doesn't really grip very well. The knife won't come out beforehand. So this as a belt knife, no. Neck knife, sure. Boot knife, well, if you see how thick the profile is, as a boot knife, it's not particularly good. This clip has the exact same problem in a boot that it does on your belt. So unless you're actually going to lash this into the front of your combat boots, like I've seen some other people do smaller backup blades, this will probably not stay in there. They're giving you a lanyard hole on this one too. Again, I'm not entirely certain what the purpose is, because that hole is gobbled up by my hands. I mean, overall, the Stinger series is a really cheap series. They tend to go for shiny, cool looking, but this is actually surprisingly functional, and in a self-defense situation, I think this is probably a little bit more useful than a tiny little dagger that really is just a tip slasher and a poker. Mostly because in most of the self-defense situations that I've been in, bigger is better, up to a point, obviously. But both of them are actually worth the money you pay for them. I think I paid $12 for this one and about the same, maybe $14 for this one. All told, I mean, they're worth their price for a self-defense item. Even a training item, I mean, this is safe enough that if you wanted to practice your self-defense situations with this and not with a live partner, you might be okay. This one, if you're willing to put in a little extra work just in case the scales come off and maybe try and figure a way to put a good edge on it, it might be worth a little bit more than, say, $14. There, you just saw I had problems putting in the sheath. There's only one way that this really likes going back in its sheath, and that's actually flat part towards the outside. So, just one thing to be aware of. Both of them are actually pretty decent self-defense items. I think if you wanted to get them and you were interested in spending only about $15, they're a decent choice. There's a few other things in the Stinger line. There's a wrist sheath one that's slightly different. There's a shoulder sheath version, just like the Combat Commander Combat Toothpick. I bought that, and the edges were ground at different angles, so I actually don't recommend getting that one. It has the exact same sheath as the Combat Commander, but the knife itself isn't quite as good. So both knives worth the 15 bucks that you're paying for them, but if you find it for any more than that, I would actually stay away. So thanks for watching this review, guys. Until next time, I'm Stick Guy 187. Stay sharp.